Growing up, Jessie was described as extremely quiet, although her father said that she was just a keen observer. She had many interests: nature, animals, art, and writing, and she was described as strong and independent. She was a deep thinker, a kind, caring girl. She would give the shirt off her back if someone needed it. And as she got older, it was obvious to everyone close to her that Jessie was artistic. She was a good writer, and she documented her trips out and saw the beauty in everything around her. It was as if she noticed things that most people would either take for granted or just pass by.
I walked up the cliffs and climbed to the top. It was so beautiful. I ran most of the way up and down over the cliff tops. My arms spread out like sails. It was like flying.
She attended an art college in Wales after leaving school. These were some of her drawings above. Eventually, she returned to England to start college at Eastbourne and starting a new life in her small flat in the town. Her family were pleased that she was back from Wales, feeling that their daughter was never safe there and stating that nothing bad ever happens in Eastbourne, it's just peaceful. Plus, it wasn't far from their parents' home by train, and she visited them about every 3 to 4 weeks. She enjoyed long walks along the coastline, usually alone, with a snack in her bag and a book ready to document her adventures. Her favourite place to walk was on Beachy Head, and what with the white cliffs, the sound of the blue and white waves crashing against the rocks, it was a regular haunt for her, a place where people knew where to find her, whether she was sketching, painting, taking photographs or walking along. She absolutely loved it there, almost like it was the best place on earth. On Thursday, the 15th of May, 1980, 22-year-old Jessie Earl rang home from a phone box on the front of Eastbourne Beach. She wanted to check in with her parents, something she would do regularly, and in those days, people didn't have mobile phones, so she used a phone box. She rang to tell her mother that she'd come over on Friday to see her and they could meet up. But then Jessie failed to arrive for the meeting at her mother's house on the Friday. Her parents were not overly concerned initially, hoping that Jessie may have just forgotten. They were simply worried that she'd not phoned them to tell them she'd changed her plans. And as they sat at home wondering if she would turn up, minutes turned into hours, and it was strange that Jessie would not notify them if plans had changed. The next day, on the 17th of May, Jessie's mother Valerie couldn't sit still. She started to become more concerned, and the longer she sat at home, the more worried she became about her daughter. So she boarded a train to Eastbourne to find out what had happened to Jessie. As she sat on the train, she considered that this was probably a huge waste of time and that she would knock on the door, Jessie would answer, all apologetic, and explain why she'd forgotten. Upon arriving at Jessie's flat in the Upperton Gardens area, her mother knocked on the door, but she got no response. She had a key, luckily, so she pushed open the door to Jessie's very small flat. It was a large white house that sat alone, and inside it had been made into many tiny flats. Perfect for Jessie, her mother had first thought. But she immediately felt that something was terribly wrong, almost like a sixth sense. Her mother knew that something was just not right. There were dirty dishes on the table, which wasn't completely unusual. A book and Jessie's reading glasses on the floor, which was strange, and her purse was on the bed with a small amount of cash in it. It appeared that the room had been abandoned, as if she had briefly left for a short time and not returned. But if she'd gone to the shops, her mother thought, surely she would have taken her purse with her. Jessie's mother spoke with some of Jessie's friends, well, the ones she could manage to get hold of anyway. Friends said that they hadn't seen Jessie since Wednesday, so 2 days before. Jessie's mother waited in the flat for Jessie to return, but she never did, so she searched more within the flat. Now, Jessie kept a diary where she would document her plans. She was very organised. She discussed the fun, artistic things that had gone on recently, her walks in nature, her plans, and discussed things that she had on her mind. But despite looking through it, her mother was no closer to working out where Jessie was. It gave them no type of indication as to why she would have disappeared. So with concerns even more heightened, Jessie's mother contacted the police and a missing person case was opened. Although due to things mentioned about Jessie and how she was feeling around the time she disappeared, such as concerns that she may have taken her own life due to pressures of exams, depression over a number of allergies that she suffered, police did not take the case as urgently as family expected. Police sniffer dogs searched the area and Jessie's bedsit was searched for clues, while missing persons posters were distributed by family and friends. And after 3 weeks, Sussex police flew a helicopter over the South Downs using a thermal imaging scanner in the hope of finding something. After police found no trace of Jessie, the investigation was scaled down. Jessie's parents continued to campaign and made appearances on the BBC television show Wogan and on Crime Watch to appeal for information into Jessie's whereabouts. Years went by. Police felt that they'd done all they could. There was no new leads, no suspects, and no new information. Despite the case remaining open, it was very much a cold case. Jessie's parents wondered if they would ever find out what had happened to their daughter, wondering every time the phone rang if it could be her. It was a living nightmare that this family felt never got easier. Then, in 1989, 9 years after Jessie had disappeared, an 8-year-old girl had been out with her father. They were flying a kite on Beachy Head when suddenly they lost control of it in the wind. The kite got caught in an overgrown, thorny bush. So the young girl and the father ran across Beachy Head to retrieve their kite. But when the child's father waded through the shrubland to retrieve it next to a tree, he discovered more than the red kite that he'd been looking for. He found what looked like a skeleton. He noticed that the skull and long bones were all together, hidden away by this thick shrubland and next to a tree. The man and his daughter ran to the local phone box to call 999, telling them what they had found and where, explaining that it definitely looked human to him. Police arrived swiftly, cordoning off the area. The only piece of clothing police could find was a bra. It looked like a black bra that had been tied around the wrists of the skeleton, and apart from this, the body was naked. Had this person been restrained? If so, police felt that this was most definitely a suspicious death and more than likely a murder. On a thin skeletal finger, a silver ring sat. A watch looked like it had been welded into the skeleton's wrist, and forensics were able to establish that this was the body of Jessie Earl after her parents gave DNA samples. The girl that they'd been looking for 9 years, and police felt that Jessie Earl had died there at the scene. A leather bag that Jessie carried everywhere with her and an inhaler were all missing, and they were not at the flat. Officers cleared an area of 20 square meters around where she'd been found. This was then excavated and the soil minutely examined for evidence. A volunteer team of metal detectors, led by an archaeologist, searched the cliffs, but they found items such as jewellery and belt buckles, although they didn't help with the investigation. At the inquest into Jessie Earl's death, it was revealed that she'd probably been tied to the tree with her bra, since most of her bones were found by the tree and the bra had been found very close to the base of the tree. 4 months after the discovery of the body, the coroner recorded an open verdict at the inquest. The reason cited for the open verdict was that there was a lack of evidence that might have proved a cause of death. However, Jessie Earl's parents insisted that she would have never run away and that she must have been killed. A police report in 1980 had previously concluded that Jessie must have taken her own life due to the pressure of exams and depression over a number of allergies that she suffered from, and a second inquest in 2022 would later highlight that this was a reason why the case had not been seriously investigated initially. In 2000, after forensic scene witnesses and pathology inquiries, police recorded that her death was that of murder. A murder inquiry was launched and the Detective Chief Inspector leading the investigation commented, "We believe that Jessie was murdered. However, because Jessie Earl's death had never been officially classed as murder, Any key forensic evidence has been destroyed by police back in 1997. This included the bra and the earth on which Jessie Earl had been found on, which had been stored afterwards, but subsequently had been destroyed. This meant that when the murder investigation was opened in 2000, the evidence could not be analysed using modern forensic techniques. The lead investigator of the 2000 inquiry, DCI Stephen Dennis, said that this was a significant mistake. A new suspect emerged in late 2000. He was a serial killer and SEX offender. His name, Peter Tobin. Now, Peter Tobin had killed 23-year-old Angelica Klunk in Glasgow in 2006. He was also subsequently linked to 2 missing persons cases in 1991 after police suspected that he was responsible for numerous other murders. 2 young women's bodies were later found buried at his former home in Margate. Police set up Operation Anagram after his 2006 murder, with the aim of tracing Peter Tobin's past movements and investigating whether he could be linked to unsolved murders such as Jessie's. The case of Jessie Earl was one of the main cases that Operation Anagram was re-investigating. Peter Tobin had lived in the area at the time that Jessie disappeared, and Jessie Earl fitted in with the kind of victims Tobin attacked. Jessie Earl was known to have been nervous about a man that she had met while previously being out walking. She had reportedly described meeting a middle-aged, Scottish-sounding man near the same spot where her body was found. Peter Tobin had a Scottish accent. In the 2022 inquest into her death, it was discovered that one of her last conversations with her mother had been about meeting this man on Beachy Head, when she also commented, "I wish men would be prepared to just be friends," almost as if Peter Tobin, or the Scottish-sounding man that she had spoken to, wasn't happy about just being friends. And could Peter Tobin be specifically placed in Eastbourne at the time, as it was discovered that he had links to the Holy Trinity Church in Eastbourne, where he apparently worked as a handyman, as a Scot named Peter was known to be working there in 1980. Now, shortly after the discovery of Jessie Earl's body became public knowledge in 1989, Peter Tobin hurriedly moved his wife, his entire family, children, and everything a great distance to Bathgate in Scotland without prior informing his wife of the plans or telling his job. This suggested that he had an underlying reason to suddenly leave the area fast, and it was notably similar to how Peter Tobin had suddenly moved a long way from Bathgate to Margate in 1991, shortly after he had murdered 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton in Bathgate, which showed he had a habit of moving across the country to avoid being detected for crimes he had committed. This was further suggested to be the case in Jessie Earl's murder, as Peter Tobin was found to have checked into a hospital in Glasgow a few days after she was killed. When Jessie Earl was found, her bra had been used to tie her hands, and Peter Tobin was known to have tied Vicky Hamilton's hands with her bra when he murdered her. In Mark William Thomas's book, Hunting Killers, he stated that although Peter Tobin buried some of his victims, he also carried out merely optimistic crimes, like Jessie Earl's case appeared to be in 1994, where 2 neighbouring 14-year-old girls in his flat before turning on the gas taps and leaving them inside, indicating he carried out disorganised random attacks, which he could have done so on Jessie Earl as he walked past her on Beachy Head. As part of Operation Anagram, police took DNA samples from Jessie Earl's parents and from her clothing, hoping to find a match with Peter Tobin's clothes or possessions. However, police were unable to find enough evidence to charge Peter Tobin with Jessie Earl's murder. A DNA link between Peter Tobin and Jessie Earl's body could not be established through modern forensic techniques, and it didn't help that the key forensic evidence had been destroyed in 1997. A similar case Operation Anagram investigated was the disappearance of 18-year-old Louise K. Now, she was from Eastbourne as well, and she disappeared in 1988, a case which bore notable similarities to Jessie's. Only had both women last been seen in Eastbourne, but Louise Kay, last known's location, was on Beachy Head, exactly where Jessie's remains were found only a year later. On Thursday, the 23rd of June, 1988, Louise Kay, her boyfriend Pete, and some friends went to a disco at Eastbourne Pier. The group left the disco in the early morning hours of Friday. Louise driving, so she gave everybody a lift home, and at some point along the way, Louise and Pete, her boyfriend, got into an argument about a trip that they were planning to go on to Newquay to get summer jobs. But Pete could no longer make the trip, as he had to pay the rent on his flat and could not afford to do both. Pete got out of the car, leaving Louise and her friend Sarah behind. Louise was upset, as she was looking forward to going on the trip, and upset and frustrated that Pete was no longer going. At around 4 a.m, Louise dropped Sarah off at her home. Sarah asked Louise if she wanted to come inside, but she said she didn't feel like it. Now, there are two different accounts as to what Louise actually told Sarah before driving off. One was that she was going home, the other that she was going to Beachy Head. Now, Beachy Head was a popular spot for nature lovers and hikers. It was an isolated area that contained the highest chalk sea cliff in Britain and provided beautiful views out to sea. But what happened after Louise left Sarah's house, nobody knows, as Louise never arrived home. Louise nor the car she was driving was ever found. Louise's house, which she shared with her parents Sylvia and Paul in Eastbourne in Sussex, was just 4 miles away from where she dropped her friend Sarah off. Reports said that Louise would often sleep in her car, and the Bracknell News reported that she did indeed head to Beachy Head to sleep in her car that morning. The car that Louise was driving belonged to her father. It was quite distinctive, a gold Ford Fiesta with a white driver's side door, registration RFG 740R. Police appealed to scrap dealers in the area to see if anyone had taken a car matching that description, but nothing was found. And back in 2010, detectives quizzed Peter Tobin about Louise Kay, but he claimed that he had never met her before. Peter Tobin was working in the hotel in Eastbourne at the time Louise went missing. Mark Williams Thomas, when he was writing his book, wrote about Peter Tobin selling a hand-painted car around the same time Louise disappeared. Louise's car was never scrapped, sold or taxed after it expired in November 1988. So someone must have changed the plates or somehow disposed of it. There are reports that Peter Tobin had links to scrapyards and car auctions, as he once was employed in the industry. One theory is that he may have painted the car and sold it or scrapped it, but this is just speculation. Peter Tobin was a despicable man. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 1993 for the rape and indecent assault on 2 girls. However, he was released in 2004. In 2009, Peter Tobin was sentenced to life in prison for the rape and murder of Angelika Klunk. However, experts and the police believe that he may have killed many other women. Peter Tobin died in prison in 2022, and as of 2023, Louise had never been found, and he had never admitted to it. And like with Jessie, Louise Kay had also met an unknown Scottish man in Eastbourne. A few days before she vanished, he had apparently given her money to buy petrol. Some of Peter Tobin's former homes in Brighton were searched back in 2010 in the belief that Louise Kay may have been buried there in the backyard, although she was never found. In 2018, investigative reporter Mark Williams Thomas released a documentary as part of the Investigator named a British CrimeStory series, in which he inserted that the cases of Jessie, Earl and Louise Kay were very likely linked, and that both women were probably victims of Peter Tobin. In criminologist David Wilson's 2012 episode of Killers Behind Bars, The Untold Story, that centred on Peter Tobin's involvement in Jessie Earl's murder, Louise Kay was also briefly brought up. Operation Anagram's lead detective, Superintendent David Swindle, told Mark Williams Thomas in the investigator documentary that he believes Peter Tobin murdered Louise Kay. Jessie Earl's parents believe that Peter Tobin was responsible for her murder. In 2022, police gathered DNA from Jessie Earl's parents and checked it against trophies and other evidence collected by David Fuller. Remember the guy we covered recently, the monster in the morgue? A double killer who had recently been convicted of killing 2 women in Tunbridge Wells in 1987. However, there were no links. Jessie Earl's parents asked that the Attorney General to open a new inquest in 2020. They stated that her body had been found naked and that they'd always known it was murder. The second inquest into Jessie Earl's murder that we've just previously touched on in May 2022 was formally concluded that her death was that of a result of unlawful killing by murder, and the hearing heard that Jessie Earl was probably tied to the tree and essayed. An officer who had been involved in the initial investigation testified that he had no doubt that Jessie Earl had been murdered. The coroner, James Healy Pratt, criticised the original police investigation and highlighted a number of flaws, pointing to the fact that a police report made when she disappeared in 1980 concluded that she may have taken her own life due to pressure of exams and depression over a number of allergies, and that assumptions like this had led to less resources being expanded on the investigation of the missing persons case, and stated that, in other words, it would have been a chilling effect on police efforts to investigate this disappearance thoroughly. The coroner concluded that the report treating her death as her taking her own life was wrong and contrary to evidence. He further highlighted one of the last conversations that Jessie had had with her mother, in which Jessie described meeting this middle-aged man during one of her walks on Beachy Head, that she had told her mother that after this incident with this Scottish man, "I wish men would be prepared to just be friends." Concluding, the coroner said that Jessie Earl's parents had been the victims of substantial injustice. Sussex Police's Chief Constable Joe Shinner responded to the result of the new inquest by stating that she fully accepted the historic failures of Sussex Police in this case, and accepting that the police investigation between 80 and 89 were inadequate, and some aspects wholly inadequate. She commented that the investigation into the case remained open, and she was committed to ensuring that any new lines of inquiry that came in would be thoroughly investigated. But up until now, Jessie's body was found, but Louise Kay is still missing. For Louise Kay's parents, they never got to find out what happened to their daughter, and it might be that at some point in the future, she is found by somebody flying a kite, just as this man and his daughter did. But for Jessie Earl's parents, although they have some kind of closure, they have their daughter and they were able to lay her to rest. Failures within the police inquiry led the evidence to being destroyed, and now, with no new lines of inquiry, no suspects, and the main man who's died, it's very unlikely that there ever will be any justice for the murder of Jessie Earl.